Hey guys, this is Rudy, and I thought I would make a video today about how I awakened. I've seen other people make similar videos, and it was inspirational to me, and I just thought I would share my story. And it's not to say that I'm special or I have any great insight or I've reached some pinnacle of truth and I'm here to educate everybody. I'm still learning, and I'm still seeking out truth, just like all of us are. But I wanted to offer my story about how I awakened, because I think that is it can help people who are still asleep if they can relate to people that that tell their story. So I don't know where to start, but I guess back in my 30s, up until my mid-30s, before 9/11, I spent my whole life chasing the dollar and putting all of my efforts and all of my energies into my job. If I had any time left, I would spend it with my family, and my priorities were all screwed up. And I was a blind nationalist. I had all kinds of worldviews that I can see now were wrong, and I know that, and my eyes have been opened. But if we push it up to like the day of 9/11, September 11th of 2001, I think all of us will remember what we were doing that day and how it affected all of us. And I remember being in my room and my wife telling me that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird, And then as the stories came in, you just knew that day was a historic day in the history of mankind, and forever, would be changed our history. So a few days later, and I wanted to share this to show how easy I fell into the trap of blind nationalism and how blind I was. And I'm offering this to be open and honest with you. I'm going to be ashamed of some of the things that I'll tell you. But I remember them showing a video, and I've got it favorited, and I just found it recently, but I remember seeing this only a few days after 9/11, or shortly after 9/11. And they show a bunch of Palestinians in the street, and they're celebrating, and they have that lady that does that weird thing with her mouth, that do-do-do-do-do, and I remember seeing that, and I remember being filled with anger as an American citizen that they were celebrating that the Twin Towers collapsed. And I remember falling hook, line, and sinker for George Bush. I related to the fact he was a Texan, and when he called himself a Christian, I was like, hey, that's great. And I remember being a staunch Republican. I was, considered myself a conservative. I was totally in the left-right paradigm. I thought Rush Limbaugh was great. If anybody spoke bad about this country or the government, I was all against them. When the Dixie Chicks, said that they were ashamed of the president was from Texas, and they started like stomping all over their CDs and they wouldn't play their CDs, I didn't see any problem with that. I'm ashamed to say this. I'm ashamed that I was that blind, but I was, right? And I fell into the trap, and I supported all of that crap. When he came out with the Patriot Act, I remember feeling like, well, hell, whatever we got to do to stop the terrorists, hell yeah, I support the Patriot Act. And now I see how wrong I was and how stupid I was and how blind I was. I'm ashamed. What got me to wake up was I saw this video, Loose Change, and I wasn't even convinced with that video. It did make me ask some questions like, wow, that's kind of weird. They make a lot of good points, but it's just some young kids making the video, and I wasn't really all that. It didn't change my mind. I remember seeing another video later on, several years after 9/11, about Architects and Engineers for Truth, and that had a pretty good impact on me. I even shared it with my dad. I remember going to dinner with my dad, and I'll never forget what he said. I remember talking about 9/11, and that molten steel, free fall speed of the building, the shape charges, World Trade Center 7, which hardly anybody ever knew about, and watching the video of that. And then I remember my dad said something that just totally embarrassed me. He said, the only person that's ever told me garbage like that, or that I've heard garbage like that from, is Rosie O'Donnell. And Rosie O'Donnell's not my favorite person, right? I don't have any ill will towards Rosie O'Donnell, but she's not somebody that is my favorite person. And I was kind of embarrassed. He kind of put me in my place, right? And, then I had to realize that it doesn't matter who speaks truth. It doesn't matter what the person looks like that speaks truth. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter. Truth is truth, no matter who speaks it. And then I came to realize that, and I got to give credit to Rosie, even though I don't like her, and I don't agree with her on a lot of different views. Hell, she was brave enough to speak out for truth, and she thinks there's a lot of unanswered questions about the falling of those buildings, and I got to give her credit. But going on to other things that were happening in my life, even then I wasn't fully awake. I didn't understand about the world and the bigger picture. I remember a friend of mine came up to my desk at work, and he said, "Do you know that the government has stopped printing M2? And M2 is an indicator of how much physical cash the government prints every year." And I think he was trying to drop a hint, because he was awake and I was not. And I said, "Well, I don't even know what M2 is, dude. The fact that they stopped printing it, why do I care?" And he suggested I watch this video called Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo that talks about taxes and how there's not a specific law that says we have to pay personal income tax. I started to get on the internet and do a little research, and somebody mentioned this book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I started to read about the Federal Reserve, the fiat money system, how the international bankers control the money supply, and they use the Federal Reserve to propagate all their evil programs, and that without the Federal Reserve they wouldn't be able to do this, and they would not be able to manipulate the population. And then I started to read books about the New World Order, and then I started to see additional videos on YouTube. And then it's like the scales fell off my eyes, and then I started to realize what's going on in the world. And again, I'm not claiming that I've got it all figured out even now, and I know that we all still have disagreements in YouTube land, even amongst the Patriot movement. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a problem at all that us YouTubers disagree with one another. I think that's great, because when you disagree with one another, somebody's going to learn something. One of the two people is going to learn something. But I started to listening and reading and becoming more aware of what's going on in the world, and I started to understand more about what our Constitution means. I started to read the Bill of Rights. Somebody told me about Ron Paul, so I started to listen to the man. His message was very clear. When I saw Sean Hannity make fun of Ron Paul, it got me very angry that I considered the man, after I'd read about him a little bit, a true patriot. And when I saw mainstream religion making him out to be a nutcase, it made me mad. And the bottom line is I started to understand and read about the history of this country and understand more clearly what made this country great, and that the fact that we were supposed to have a limited form of government that allowed the individual to have freedom to pursue happiness and to not be impinged by a big government. And the bottom line is I also read a book from Ayn Rand. It's called Atlas Shrugged, and it made things really clear about how some people rise up in a company that have no skills whatsoever, and how the moochers, looters, bootlickers, and incompetent people take advantage of the producers and achievers, especially if the producers and achievers don't take a stand. And it just, my eyes just opened up to how great this country is and what makes us special in all the world, and why people have a good feeling when they come to America, because they are free, and we should be free of persecution for our religious beliefs. We should have freedom of speech. We shouldn't have a big tyrannical government illegally searching our properties. And I started to recognize what makes America great. And I know we don't have a perfect history, and I know that the white man took advantage of the Indian, and there was slavery, but those are blemishes on a record of a great country. And we need to talk about the bad things of America, but we also need to recognize what made this country great, and what allows us to have the freedom and independence and of tyranny of a big government. And once I started to have open eyes about that, my life took on a different meaning. I also got a closer relationship with the Lord, and so my life is very exciting now. I realize that I'm aware now of a lot more evil in the world, but at the same time, I don't live to just for materialistic purposes. I don't want to go out and just buy bullshit from China anymore and just fill my life with material things. I believe that there's a more intensity to life, because I feel like I'm fighting for the side of truth. I want to speak out for truth. I'm inspired by my YouTube friends, my Patriot friends, and I want to do everything I can for the side of good. And it's just very exciting to me. And that's my story. I used to be an asshole. I used to be a blind nationalist, and now I'm less of an asshole. I'm probably still an asshole, but I'm less of an asshole. So that's my story. Hopefully, somebody out there can relate, and it'll help you on your journey towards truth. God bless every one of you, and take care.